Let's get to the news. All right. So this week we got to start off by talking about Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire. So Matt Walsh did some sort of investigative reporting this past week. If you're not familiar, he's a conservative, blogger and author and such with Daily Wire. He basically did some really groundbreaking reporting on Vanderbilt University Medical Center and their transgender clinic, where they're doing, mastectomies, hormone replacement therapies, puberty blockers, bottom surgeries, and all the rest. And he calls it here unthinkable. And he was on Tucker Carlson to go ahead and actually discuss his findings with him. And right out of the gate, I have to say, in my opinion, Matt Walsh deserves strong consideration for a Times Person of the Year or some equivalent of that if it exists on the right. He's just been on fire ever since the kind of the start of this year, but especially following his documentary, What is a Woman? So just kind of a little bit of context here. He shares some video from 2018, which is when they started to actually do these surgeries. And the big thing here is Dr. Shane Taylor, who I guess, heads this transgender clinic. She basically described the surgeries as, quote, a big money maker because they're really expensive. They take a lot of time and sort of skill, and they require a lot of follow-ups as well. So that allows, the hospital to charge, well into the six figures for these operations, kind of from start to end, right, over a period of time. And then it's interesting because the doctor also says, hey, if we have doctors who are against this, there will be consequences if they choose to object. So conscientious objectors would face consequences, even if it's on religious grounds. She didn't actually say what those consequences would be, but she did say that there will be consequences. And in response to this story that came out this past week, literally within 24 hours, so many things happened. Vanderbilt took their website down temporarily for this. They issued a statement basically defending their practice and saying how, some of the stuff that Dr. Taylor says here is actually untrue or not fully accurate. And a lot of politicians start to jump on board. So you have the governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee, comes out and basically calls for an investigation into the it's called the Pediatric Transgender Clinic at VUMC. And then other multiple lawmakers basically kind of jumped on board saying, yeah, we need to act immediately to do something about this. So really, really groundbreaking stuff from Matt Walsh. The biggest thing that he's done since the What is a Woman documentary. And this comes on the heels of a Friday story that Libs of Tik Tok put out, which is a very similar practice happening at the University of Wisconsin Health, so UW Health, and their own sort of gender program offering pretty much the same types of quote unquote services to young people, right? To minors. And it's interesting here because she basically gives the whole scoop, shows a lot of video recordings, walks through the process and shows kind of the head of that particular clinic, Catherine Gast, kind of describing their process and what they do and going into a pretty good amount of detail here, who they're beholden to, WPATH. And very similarly to the Vanderbilt story on this past Friday, UW Health basically removed their videos from their website and even scrubbed their actual website with information about the gender program, but it's been already archived. So really, really groundbreaking stuff this past week just on the sort of gender affirmation front, or let's say transgender ideology front. One of the things that I thought was the most interesting here was that she describes, this Dr. Gass, the surgeries as being, quote, completely safe and reversible with no harm done. So let's see if I can find that. Yeah. In the same interview, Gass claims puberty blockers are completely safe and completely reversible. She explains that it just pauses puberty to give kids more time to figure things out, and there's no harm done if the kid changes their mind. This is a big deal because this is directly contrary to what we've been hearing, or I've been hearing from a lot of people who have actually gone through the process, as well as those who've studied it in any more detail beyond just a cursory look. Most notably, we have this story from Chloe Cole, who was actually subject to this sort of transgender experimentation stuff that's happening. She basically gave a pretty major press conference this past week with Marjorie Taylor Greene, basically just like telling her story, and in 6 minutes or so, and talking about how she was brought into the system, I believe at the age of 12, started going through the process, and then basically decided, hey, look, some years later, I made a mistake. I was wrong. But by then, obviously a huge amount of damage done to her body. And one of the things that she says here is that she basically says that the doctors will manipulate parents, and they also manipulated her parents by saying, look, would you rather have a dead child or a living child? And if you don't affirm them through this transgender surgery and process and hormones and therapies and such, then they basically will die. So very, very crazy stuff here. It's almost like I don't know, extortion or kidnapping, or I don't know, some kind of terrorism, if you would. Let us do this surgery, give the green light, or else something terrible will happen to you and your family. So yeah, really, really powerful stuff. I have to give it to Matt Walsh again. He should be Times Person of the Year. Not because he's taking the issue and talking about it, but because he's getting national attention, and he's giving really, an assist. So he's saying, look, Republican 2022 candidates, we have gone ahead and made this stuff national issues. They are also winning political issues. All you have to do is take the reins. We're trying to hand to you, right? And he says, look, this is all part of a plan. So back in January of this year, he says, this year I will be waging an all-out assault on gender ideology. We've been working on something that will make the Dr. Phil episode seem tame and boring by comparison. I can't say anything else about it, but it will change the conversation. We can win this battle. Huge. And guess what? It looks like so far, at least in Vanderbilt's situation, they are winning the battle, right? So you have this promise, let's say, from Governor Bill Lee saying, we're going to investigate. Republican lawmakers plan to strip Vanderbilt Hospital of child transgender surgery. So they're looking to put them out of business. Very, very huge stuff. Seth Dillon from Babylon Bee lending his support. So easy S tier for this one. Huge, huge, huge story. Matt has been on a roll. He's been a champion, and he's probably one of the most prolific people to ever emerge on the kind of political scene like this. And he represents the average person, which I think is like super important, because it kind of inspires people to say you don't have to be president or a billionaire or whatever to kind of get recognition. You can be an average lad who just accepts responsibility, right? And when it's on the left, they cheer, right? The Greta Thunbergs of the world, et cetera. But what about this here, which is, a right championed issue, but really it affects both sides. Will he get the recognition he deserves? Time will tell. So next up, we got to talk about the Department of Justice. So they've been on a roll recently, very, very busy this year, both on things that I think are good and things that I think are bad. And in this case, we're going to start with things that are good. So they are charging 47 Minnesota Somali community members with stealing $250 million in COVID-19 relief funds from a child nutrition program. And, I've been hearing about this through the grapevine, but I just want to say from the jump, this is not like a kind of an isolated issue, right? So this is happening all over the place. So I'll just kind of go down the list here. You have a man in California who was sentenced to 11 years for $27 million in PPP kind of fraud loan scheme. You have a man in South Carolina convicted of COVID-19 relief fund in the amount of about $300,000. He's also getting convicted. You have 3 people based out of Idaho who are basically being charged for $2.4 million in relief funding kind of fraud. And then you even have a West Virginia woman who's on board with this sort of fraud scheme narrative as well through the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's really interesting that like one of the many tragedies of this whole pandemic situation, and there are many, is that's kind of not talked about, is just massive amounts of spending associated with massive amounts of fraud, which I think falls on both the fraudsters themselves, but as well as the actual government and bureaucratic officials who, in my opinion, exercise negligence, right, and actually carrying out these policies without any level of oversight, accountability, traceability, et cetera, et cetera. And I say that like tongue in cheek because they actually were able to hunt these folks down, so to speak. But at the same time, that shouldn't have happened in the first place, right? And then an interesting kind of twist on the narrative: the Secret Service apparently has hunted down and returned $268 million in fraudulently obtained COVID-19 relief funds as part of a broader investigation, right? So it says here, the Secret Service says it has seized more than $1.4 billion in wrongfully obtained funds since 2020 and has begun more than 3,850 inquiries and investigations into pandemic-related fraud. This is massive. We're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars of fraud all over the place. People are out here winning the lottery. You have a culture of lawlessness. I didn't even know Secret Service was involved in stuff like this. I thought it was just really DOJ, FBI type of thing. Interesting, like a part of me very kind of facetiously wishes, they had the same level of fervor when it came to, left-wing extremism or the 2020 election. But, I'll take this as an overall positive sign, though. And then on a kind of the flip side of this good action to hopefully recoup wasted money given to criminals, we have the dark side of the FBI and the DOJ and the federal government overall. So what just broke recently, the FBI raided the home of a Catholic pro-life activist as his 7 screaming children watched. Okay, so Matt Hawk, I guess is how you pronounce his last name. He's the founder and president of the King's Men. It's basically a conservative group for men to help them be men in this day and age. And he's very, very pro-life, right? So the FBI literally raided and swatted his home 7 in the morning. They sent 25 to 30 fully armored FBI agents, right? So think Trump raid kind of thing in terms of early morning raids as they tend to do. They come out guns a-blazing, right? Prior to opening the door, Mark allegedly tried to reason with the agents to calm down for the sake of his children. Please, I'm going to open the door, but please, my children are in the home. I have 7 babies in the house, he allegedly told the agents. So, and they just kept pounding and screaming on the door. They had huge rifles pointed at him. Think about that, pointed at him, and pointed it throughout the house. So Ryan Marie is his wife. So kind of crazy. And you would think, who is this guy? Is this Pablo Escobar? Is this Tony Montana? Is this Frank Lucas? What's happening here? Is this Osama bin Laden? No. It's just a father and a community member who's pro-life, and his crime, so to speak, is. So apparently he had been kind of regularly, let's say, protesting / standing somewhere in the vicinity of pro-life centers, and he would bring his son with him. And I didn't mean to say pro-life centers. I meant to say abortion centers. And there was an altercation one day. So I'm just going to read this one right here. So on several occasions when Marks went to Sidewalk Council last year, he took his eldest son, who was 12 at the time, and he explained, or she explained, and then for weeks and weeks, one of the pro-abortion protesters would speak to the boy saying crude, inappropriate, disgusting things to him, right? And so repeatedly, Mark would tell this pro-abortion protester or man that he didn't have the permission to speak to his son and please refrain from doing so. And he kept doing it. And then he basically came into the son's personal space, obscenely ridiculing him in front of his father. At that point, Mark shoved him away from his child, and the guy fell back. He didn't have any injuries or anything, but he tried to sue Mark, and the case was thrown out early in that summer. So his crime is pushing a guy who was basically using threatening body language or behavior with his 12-year-old son, or then 12-year-old son. So that's the situation. The feds, they're looking to hit him with this thing called the FACE Act. The FACE Act makes it a federal crime to intimidate, injure, or interfere with anyone attempting to provide abortion access. What's interesting about this one to me is, a couple of different things, right? First of all, the case had already been dismissed by a district court in Philadelphia earlier this year, 2022, before Merrick Garland's DOJ decided to pick it up. So what I mean by that is it was basically something that could have been handled at the state and local level, and I guess was being handled. But the Garland DOJ decided they wanted to step it up and basically get involved almost on an elective basis, if you would. And then they use kind of a lot of force, unnecessary amount of force. The guy wasn't injured, as I mentioned. And there's an interesting legal conceptual question here. Did he push the man on the basis of him being an abortionist and trying to do abortions? Or was it on the basis of him confronting his child, right? After he was asked several times not to yell at his child, not to get close to his child, etc. And if it was on the basis of his child and not on the basis of his role, can an argument even be made that the FACE Act applies here, right? Because look at this. I mean, it's saying if the victim is targeted because of their association with a reproductive health care clinic, then it is a federal crime. So if you push someone because of their association with the clinic, I can see that being a crime, but it wasn't because of that. It was because this person was being aggressive towards his child. So in my opinion, I don't really see the legal basis for it. So anyway, I'm just gonna kind of collectively take these two DOJ stories, and I'm gonna move them to A tier. Interesting to see, the good and the bad of the FBI trying to fix the broken political system by recuperating these funds from criminals who are steeping billions of dollars from the U.S. But at the same time, preying upon conservatives across the board. Okay. So next up, we got to talk about Stacey Abrams. So this is a quick one. So she basically was at an event in Atlanta, and she basically is like, look, a heartbeat does not actually start at 6 weeks. That's just a manufactured sound made up by the patriarchy, effectively. Men did that in order to intimidate women into not having ownership over their bodies, let's say. And she came down, I should say got criticized pretty heavily by calling this heartbeat a manufactured sound. And you have Dr. Roger Marshall here. He's saying, hey, OBGYN here, unlike Stacey Abrams, this is factually incorrect. There's no man behind the curtain. Babies have a real heartbeat at 6 weeks. Why do radical Dems hate unborn babies? And part of the reason this story matters is because we're in a situation where the heartbeat bill went into effect. I think it was introduced in 2019 in Georgia. Now it's in effect after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Lindsey Graham recently came out and is trying to really amplify the abortion issue in this 2022 election through his own nationalization bill, which is going to ban abortions after 15 weeks. And you have folks like Karine Jean-Pierre who are kind of getting into tussles with Peter Doocy from Fox News about that abortion issue. So really, really touchy subject here. And good to see her called out in almost real time by people kind of left, right, and middle, but mostly right and middle. Pretty big own here. I'm also going to move this to the A tier, just given the kind of the national relevance of the abortion topic at this time. Okay, so next up, we have to talk about this interesting, how would I say this, theme of the left kind of eating its own here. So one of the things that I always try to look for is when there's sort of dissension amongst the ranks. And I think this is an example of that. So Larry Summers, he was an economic advisor under the Obama administration. He was at a conference the other week, and he's like, look, and I'm going to quote here, it's kind of insane that we have trucks and trains carrying oil all over this country rather than constructing pipelines, Summers said, which would permit accessing to more resources and allow for cheaper, safer transmission. So he's like, why aren't we building and using these pipelines? It doesn't make any sense, right? And this is an Obama person. This is if he's not a lefty, he's at least willing to play ball with the lefties, coming out and saying this, right? And then you have the DHS secretary under Obama, I guess Jay Johnson. Hopefully I said that first name right. He says, when I was in office, the border numbers were annually about 300 to 400,000 a year. We are now getting that in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. That's just crazy. Really, really interesting. And then to round it out, we have I'm gonna slot this into it as well, which is the situation around Jamie Dimon. So Jamie Dimon, he got into an argument with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who basically brought a bunch of bankers to Congress and said, look, we need you to end fossil fuel financing. And they all basically said no. But Jamie Dimon gave her a bit of a very quick tongue lashing. He says, look, it would be the road to hell for America if we halted the sale of oil and gas prices. So he's basically saying we should continue to finance the oil and gas industry as bankers. And then Tlaib got really angry about that. She's like, hey, customers should no longer do business with JP Morgan. Very childish stuff, right? It's like an adult talking to a child. And I put this under the sort of dissension amongst the ranks because Jamie Dimon is one of those tacit left people. He's almost like a reluctant Democrat in this day and age. I almost put him in the same kind of category as like a Bill Maher, right? He's conscious enough to see like the ludicrousness of the far left, but he's not brave enough to actually do anything about it. So he said here back in 2019, my heart is a Democrat, but my mind is a Republican. Right. And he even went so far as to consider a run for the presidency. So he's like, hey, I can beat Trump in an election. Right. And kind of jumping on the bandwagon of like, insults and beratement. He says, look, I'm as tough as he is. I'm smarter than he is. I'll be fine. He could punch me all he wants. It wouldn't work on me. I'd fight right back. Right. And, by the way, this wealthy New Yorker, speaking of himself, actually earned his money. It wasn't a gift from daddy. So he was talking pretty big, right? Kind of trying to do some cheerleading on the left-hand side. But I think it's really, really insightful what he said here a couple of years ago. He says, I think I could beat Trump, right? But I can't beat the liberal side of the Democratic Party. So even in those days, he knew that there was a bunch of crazy wokesters like Rashida Tlaib and others they just don't live in reality. They're adult-sized children. And they wouldn't allow him to even have a snowball's chance in hell. And that turned out to be true. When you look at like Michael Bloomberg, for example, he didn't have a particularly successful run and basically just wasted a lot of time and money and embarrassed himself. So overall, I'm going to move this kind of general story to the A tier as well. I think it's interesting when you see, Obama officials or former Obama officials speaking out, when you have people who considered running under the Democrat banner speaking out, when you have prominent folks like Jeremy Siegel from the Wharton School basically like criticizing, the Fed in terms of what he's doing to the economy, kind of speaking out. There's a lot of interesting dissension amongst our sort of ruling elite class overall. That seems to be pretty remarkable at the moment. And then I have to mention, really just kind of in passing here, like the Russian mobilization front. So Russia basically it ordered 300,000 people from the reserves to move to the war front in the war against Ukraine, and went to the point of stopping the sale of tickets to Russian men who were of kind of able-bodied fighting age, 18 to 65 here. This was a huge one, not on a domestic culture war front, but just in general because it affects us all in terms of the existential threat and what that means in terms of like the ability to nip this whole Ukraine situation in the bud before the midterms, or will this continue to be a threat through the midterms and beyond? Overall, I'm going to move this to C tier. It's more of the same, but it is a market escalation when you talk about pulling all these people off of reserves, and there's been more talk around using nukes. So that affects everybody, and it'll continue to be sort of a talking point within the culture war between the right and the left, in terms of their support for Ukraine, and basically how far are we willing to go? Is it just going to be child support, or we just pay these guys billions of dollars every week and that's it? Or are we going to continue, basically almost escalate the situation and make it even more of a hot war than it already is? Okay. And then I have to at least mention here basically a murder that happened in North Dakota, of all places. Not necessarily, from what I knew, a liberal place, but a 41-year-old man. He basically just ran down an 18-year-old with a car due to political reasons. They got into a political argument, and the 41-year-old, who I guess was drunk at the time, decided he wants to run over the guy with his car and kill him. And then he admits to doing it and to killing him because of the fact that he was a Republican. And he gets a slap on the wrist. This does not get national media attention. His bail was set with at $50,000. He got charged with vehicular homicide. And I believe he posted the bail, so he's walking now. And that's it. That's really the end of the story. And one of the reasons this is kind of shocking, if you would, is because Joe Biden just a couple weeks ago gave a villainous speech in Philadelphia, basically calling Republicans extremists and equating them with domestic terrorists. So there seems to be potentially a link here. Overall, I'm going to move this to a B category. It's a big deal, but it's one of those things where it hasn't really gotten the national conversation going enough to really drum up, scrutiny of the Biden administration or kind of what this all means. I haven't heard of any reporters asking the White House about this in terms of what this means. Maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't heard about it. So unfortunately, this is going to get a little bit memory hold, like a lot of other things, like the Waukesha massacre from last year, unfortunately. If your race isn't right or your politics aren't right, the mainstream media and the establishment doesn't give 2 cents about you. Okay. And then the last thing that I thought was worth highlighting this week is there's kind of an interesting, let's say, thread or theme as of late, which is that the White House has been walking back stuff for Biden to an unusually high degree. So they've been doing this for a while now, it's pretty much forever for this administration. But this is the first time, to my knowledge, that there's been 3 clear events and walkbacks in 1 week. So let's just walk through those. So first, Biden gives a 60 Minutes interview. He's like, yes, the troops would defend Taiwan. And then immediately after, the White House is like, actually, we won't do that. That's not our policy. So that's walk back number 1. And then walk back number 2 is Joe Biden is in, I think, Detroit. He's at some kind of car show, and he's talking to the reporter there. And he's like, hey, so is the pandemic over? And then Biden's like, yes, the pandemic's over. And then the White House walked that back. Fauci and other scientists said, wait a minute, that's not true at all. So that's walk back number 2 from the White House after Biden does that. And then he's given a speech in Washington State, and he's like, hey, gas prices are less than $2.99 right now in 41 states plus DC. And the White House is like, oh, wait, sorry, he's senile. The number was $3.99, not $2.99. So sorry about that. So we've gotten to a point where, I don't know, it's somewhere between I guess you might call it, if it was Shakespeare, I guess it would be like kind of a tragic comedy. But the question is, at what point does it cross the line between, let's say, tragic comedy and just pure tragedy? Given all the devastation that we're seeing in the country, right? He just got lost after giving a UN speech. He's walking around aimlessly on stage for a minute, just looking like someone who escaped the old folks home or geriatric home. And then he was at some other rally, and he's admitting to having a relationship with a 12-year-old when he was 30. So he looks in the crowd, sees some woman, and is like, oh, I knew you when you were 12 and I was 30. You helped me out or whatever. just really, really weird. And given his reputation. So that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to today's rundown. If you liked what you heard, please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.